So I'm going to go through and I'm going to talk about the different schedule and also kind of give an overview, an introduction and overview. Our mission, and we'll show this from time to time, is really to note that we are called to preach and teach the gospel and contend for the faith. And if we're going to contend for the faith, we need to know what we believe. We need to understand it. And we need to understand what the other side believes. And we need to be able to defend what we believe and refute the error. So that's what apologetics is all about. That's what defending the faith is all about. So we're going to teach the truth and expose lies, oppose non-biblical perspectives, and contend for the faith. So these are three key areas of our mission. And our approach will be outlined here. You see some symbols. When you see the little columns, those will be our foundational principles. God's word is the foundation upon which our lives are based, and we will be proclaiming that throughout because we have to go back to the foundation. And then the glasses represent the biblical lens. God's word is a corrective lens that gives a clear, undistorted view of culture. So when you see those glasses, we're going to be looking at God's perspective. And then the full battery is biblical sufficiency. God's word is sufficient to address every cultural issue. And one of the things that we have found in this new movement is that they believe that God's word is insufficient, that God's power is insufficient. Therefore, they are creating their own religion of sorts. And we'll be talking about that through these weeks. What I'm going to do today is to, of course, introduce and talk about these three questions. How did we get here? What is the problem? And where do we go from here? And I want to start with this quote from a recent article. I don't know if you know about Andrew Sullivan. He used to be one of the writers for the New York Times Magazine, well respected, but he kept on getting knocked for his views. And finally, he just said, enough is enough. And last year, he resigned from his job. And he said that he's fed up with being woke checked for his articles, for his views. And in that, he mentioned another person sharing his sentiments, and that is the Somali Dutch scholar and activist Ayaan Hirsi Ali. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She is brilliant. And she wrote a book, Infidel. I highly recommend it to you. Talks about her background, how she came from Somali, the terror that she met there at the hands of Muslims. She grew up a Muslim. She got out of that, pushed that aside, and she was a politician in the Netherlands and then came to the States. So she's now in the States. Well, in a recent interview with Fox News, Ali said that woke initiatives like critical race theory are teaching children to hate one another. As for wokeness in general, she called it the worst philosophy she'd ever encountered. Now look at her. She has a voice that needs to be heard. She's been through it as a woman, as a Black woman. As all that the new culture, the woke culture talks about, with intersectionality. She has a voice for them, but her voice is on our side. Even though hasn't embraced Christianity as far as I know yet, what she says is very powerful. This is her quote. It divides us into people of different races, and it says that these racial differences are irreconcilable, and then divides along gender, along transgender, along immigrants. It sees no reconciliation, no coming together, unless the people that they describe as eternal victims, Black people, people of color, women, transgender people, unless they unite to destroy and dismantle our existing institutions, she said. It's a very nihilistic zero-sum game. It's the worst philosophy I've ever come across. And I tend to agree with her. As I said, I've studied apologetics, taught apologetics for almost 40 years. And this is full of a lot of the anti-Christian philosophies and worldviews that you find in a number of these areas. And it is one that we face today, and it's growing. And there are some things that we need to recognize from this voice that are things that we need to take care of. They are bringing up very evident problems with our society. So we need to look at that. There are some good things that we need to look at, but there are a lot of destructive elements too. And that's what we want to outline so that you understand what's going on, okay? Our schedule will be full. So next week, I'll be handing it off to Kevin, and he's going to get into the cultural topics. We have 4 blocks. You can see that this block is on cultural topics, dealing with critical race theory, intersectionality, social justice, social gospel. We need to know what these terms mean. We need to know where they came from. And we are going to look at the sources. We're going to look at both sides, from the Christian perspective and also the perspective of those who are writing and guiding this movement. So 2 books that I would recommend right now. We have this in our library or our bookstore, and this is by Vodi Bakum, Black preacher who is right on the mark. If you have, how many have read this, Fault Lines? Okay. This is the book that will kind of cover a lot of the material. And we're hoping to get Vodi Bakum here. He is coming to Columbia in the summer, I know, but we're going to try to also pull him into something if we can. But Fault Lines is excellent. And then from the other side, and this is from an atheist, but he is one of the foremost writers and guides for this movement. His name is Richard Delgado. His book, The Critical Race Theory. And we will not have this in the bookstore, but you may want to look that up and purchase that on your own. It gives a lot of the background and definitions and outline of their motives and their agenda. So it's good to know that. So we have been reading from both sides so that we can give an understanding from both sides. And Kevin will be doing a lot of that. Richard Delgado, Delgado, all one word, Richard Delgado. The name of the book is just Critical Race Theory. Yes. And then next week when Kevin starts, he's going to give us a whole list, and we'll start the notes next week. And we'll be putting notes up of the, and also the PowerPoints will be available as well. We'll send those to you. And this PowerPoint too, if you're on the email list, you'll receive a copy of this afterwards. And we are recording it through Zoom. So if anyone misses it during the week, if you're not here on a Sunday, you're not able to Zoom, we are zooming it live and recording it, and we'll put it up on our new website, which Kevin will be explaining next week, because he's been the chief architect of that, and it's brilliant, and it's going to be very helpful. Okay, so Kevin's going to take the first block, cultural topics. Then Brad and I are going to share the faith agenda. What do we believe? Why do we believe it? And how does it interact with this other culture? So the mission of the church, biblical inerrancy, because that's being attacked from all sides. Doctrinal guardrails, how do we stay in line? And then you notice the 4th block on each of these, or the 4th Sunday in each of these, is for kind of a question and answer panel. So the three of us will be part of it. We'll be doing role playing. We'll be putting up different videos from different speakers and then analyzing those things. That'll be very helpful for us to see from these particular experts, what they're saying and what we can learn from them. So about every fourth week, we'll be doing that. So the second block is on our faith. The third block, we're going to bring in a guest, Josh Guilo, who is here in the church. He works with Peter Jones and Truth Exchange, which is a very front edge apologetic group. And Peter Jones is brilliant. Josh is great. He does great interviews, and he and his group have been dealing with the concept of gender and LGBTQ agenda. And he'll give us some insight into what he's been dealing with. So that'll be very interesting and helpful, because sexuality and gender is at the core of so much of what is happening and interacting with our culture. It's transformed our culture, as you know, from the 60s on. And it's been around since the 60s on. And then we'll have our panel at the end of that. And then we'll have the Christian response. Now, each week we'll be dealing with Christian areas of rebuttals, of understanding. But this last block, we're going to go into more detail. Has God said? We're going to look at apologetic issues. How do you defend what you believe? How would you approach somebody who is involved in these particular ideas? What can you say? How can you answer their questions? Josh, you're back there. Thank you. So Josh is going to be coming in and giving his brilliance to us on loan for a couple of times. Thank you, Josh. And so you see, all of us will be working on November 28th. That's right after Thanksgiving, looking at some social issues. Then Brad will come in and talk about radical reconciliation. And that's going to be really, really helpful. Talk about real reconciliation. Then we're going to wrap up the following Sunday. And we have one extra week in our schedule that we're going to do, and that will be the Christmas story, a rendition of that. A little bit different from what I've done in the past. I'm going to update, but it's a very, very helpful time because it gives you a different perspective on what really happened historically. And I'll leave that to that time. Okay, so how did we get here? How did we get here? I want to go back just a bit historically, because I think it's very relevant. And we're going to look at some ties with the French Revolution, because this was a program of de-Christianization at the max. So on November 10th, 1793, Christendom received a staggering blow. The Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris had been turned into a temple of reason. God had been kicked out and replaced with the goddess of reason. So it was a program of de-Christianization, much the same as we're seeing today. I see a lot of parallels. For example, the leaders of the French Revolution attempted to throw off what they perceived to be the limitations of the church. They forced priests, bishops, and other religious leaders out of their posts. Note this, they renamed 1,400 names of streets in Paris in order to eliminate the references to saints and emperors. Does that sound familiar? They tried to cut off any association with the Roman Catholic Church. Indeed, they tried to rid themselves of anything connected with Christianity. Now, that was written by Alexis de Tocqueville on the French Revolution. Interesting facts. And remember, they were looking at liberty, equality, and fraternity, sometimes liberty, reason, and equality. But instead of liberty, they brought in totalitarianism and destruction and hatred. Instead of equality, they brought in a greater inequality. They tried to destroy the elite, the upper class, In fact, between the years of 1792 and 1794, in those 2 years, 40,000 people were beheaded at the guillotine. 40,000. Then Napoleon Bonaparte came in shortly after that and stopped that. So it was one good thing he did. But fraternity, brotherhood, no. It was a time of hatred, of fear, of terror, and everything that was destructive to a government and to a people. And there are parallels today. Consequences of the revolution. This is again in Mark Knowles' book, Turning Points, quote from Arnold Toynbee. In the revolution, a sinister ancient religion which had been dormant suddenly re-erupted with elemental violence. This revenant was the fanatical worship of collective human power. Think of that, human power. The terror was only the first of the mass crimes that have been committed since the revolution in this evil religion's name. What was that religion? Well, we can call it paganism. Truth Exchange calls it neo-paganism, and they do a great job. If you haven't read anything by Peter Jones and Truth Exchange, some of his books are in our bookstore, and they're great. Okay, this is a quote from Connor Cruz O'Brien, who noted what was going on. The older supernatural God had faded into the distance indeed, but it was not reason, mostly, that took his place. Listen to this. It was new terrestrial, earthly creeds with new revelations and exponents who were often as arbitrary, as arrogant, and as fanatical as the worst of the old persecuting priests and monks. Because remember, they were going against the church and saying, this is arbitrary, this is totalitarian from the church. Well, they turned it around and they became the totalitarian, arrogant, fanatical people. So as a de-Christianization of Europe, a secularization of the European mind, and it's been devastating, and the effects are still felt in Europe. In many places, less than 5% of the population go to church. Most people will not claim to be Christians, though they still have remnants of a Christian background. It's, you know, the mess. Well, ideas spread in 3 ways. And this I pick up from Francis Schaeffer. Geographically, ideas migrate from one region to another through migration, that's usually slow, or quickly by war, communication, commerce, the internet. Also culturally, from philosophy to art to music to general culture, novel, poetry, drama, films, and to theology. We'll look at that trend in a moment. It's really interesting. So geographically, culturally, and as I said, a lot of it is to stamp out Christianity. It's anti-Christian in many ways. Now, what is this paradigm shift? As I said, it starts with philosophy. The philosophers come up with these ideas. It's carried in the arts and music. It's really interesting when you study music, how much comes through with these different trends and ideas, and certainly with the art. And then the general culture, it filters down to the general culture. And what is last? Who are the last ones to realize what's going on? And maybe 100, 150 years after? The theologians, the church. We're always behind. And we should be at the forefront. And that's why we have this class, so that we can be on top of things. So you see the book, How Should We Then Live, by Francis Schaeffer. Excellent book. If you have not read this, you need to get it out of the library and read it. But he talks about even the third one, socially. From intellectuals, Richard Delgado, to the educated, because they have taken over the major universities. You know that. Harvard, Yale. You know, Harvard and Yale, William Mary, where my wife and I attended, those were the earliest schools. You know what they were founded to do? train preachers. And they're doing everything but that. And even Yale with their divinity school turns that around. It may take hundreds of years for an idea to move from the philosophical stage until it becomes part of popular culture. Sometimes this can happen in one generation, especially if you have the technological means. Twitter, Facebook, the internet. So what's happening? I mean, you find out something immediately. And that's good and that's bad. So again, we're looking at the end of Christendom, according to some. So what is the problem? Well, there are 6 signs of the end. There's a lot more to this, but I'll just give you the titles. You have, first of all, the rise of secularization. And that's what we see in our culture. Fewer people going to church. A lot of people who grew up in the church are now calling themselves nuns. Not the ones with habits, though their habits are very poor at times in a different way. N-O-N-E-S, no religion. Now, they may be Christian at heart, but they don't go to church and they want to live their own life. They're just on the transition stage. But there are a lot of them. Some claim about 20%. And even though our population surveys say that about 70% of the people in the United States claim to be Christians, that cannot be so. We have a lot of nominal or cultural or lapsed or nuns. So the rise of secularization. Number 2, the church had lost its intellectuals. Now it was losing its working classes as well. And that's what's happening in our society, where the middle class and lower class are being turned away from the church, away from these principles, away from morality and good ethics. Number 3, philosophical shifts that are critical to religion. Philosophical shifts that are critical to religion. We see that through the critical race theory ideas. A science drift. Think of Darwin. I'm going to show that a little bit more in another slide. But science has gone away from Christianity. In the 1700s and 1800s, you know who were the leading scientists? They were all Christians. Christianity was the only religion that could bring about modern science because they believed that there is a God who was orderly and created these things with order, and physics worked because there was order. And we still believe that, most of us as Christians. Number 5, a rejection of biblical authenticity. So now they're saying it's insufficient. Not only inauthentic, it has problems. It's made up, they say, or it's insufficient. And number 6, human potential. God in the image of man. People want to become their own God. And they think that government will be the best way for them to do that. And so they make government their own religion. We talked about 7 worldview questions in the past. James Sire wrote a book on the universe next door, dealing with these. We're going to explain or put the critical race theory into this at the end of what I'm doing. So what is prime reality, the really real? That's first question. Second, what is the nature of external reality? Third, what is a human being? Fourth, what happens to a person at death? 5, why is it possible to know anything at all? 6, how do we know what is right and wrong? And 7, what is the meaning of history? Well, I brought that up here. I'm going to link it to the new movement at the end of this talk, but there's a reason for having it now. To introduce these terms: metaphysics, how did the universe get here? Ontology, where did God come from? Where did man come from? Origins, think of ontology. Epistemology, how do we know what we know? And axiology, what is the basis for our ethical system? Those are the big words, big terms that are used. We're just going to keep it simple. But we start off with theism in our own country. We start off and people believe that there is a God, a creator. Deism was pretty popular, even with some of our founding fathers, where they believed there was a God, but he kind of created the world and left it alone, gave it the order and the different rules, scientific rules and principles, but left it alone. And therefore, he was kind of out of the picture. And so man had to pull himself up from his own bootstraps in a way, even starting then. And so that eventually kicked God out of the picture. Nature was enough. The world was enough, especially when Darwin came in and said, well, we can see that we don't need a God to create this world or to bring the world. But as people thought about that, they realized that, oh, if there's no God, there's no meaning ultimately. And the ultimate end of nihilism is there is no meaning. And the proponents of nihilism had to do something, because the ultimate would be to just kill themselves. There is no meaning. Whatever they do, whatever great things, in the end, it's nothing. And they didn't like that. And so they tried to buffer that with existentialism. And you had atheistic existentialism and you had theistic existentialism, a little bit different. But that's kind of like the hybrid philosophy in CRT today, where you have some Christian leaders who are trying to pull some of these critical race theories in. Okay, comparison chart just to show nihilism, atheistic existentialism, theistic existentialism, biblical Christianity. Very quickly, is there inherent meaning in the universe? No, maybe, and yes. The only one that can say yes is Christianity. Can we create real meaning ourselves? No. Atheistic existentialism? Yes, this is all we can do to avoid nihilism. Theistic existentialism? Yes, by faith in meaning beyond yourself. Only in biblical Christianity do we realize that real meaning comes from belief in an actual God. Is the pursuit of created meaning possible? Nihilism says no. Even created meaning in the end is meaningless. So whatever you do is ultimately meaningless. Remember what Ayaan Hirsi Ali said in that earlier quote? This whole new movement is nihilistic. It's meaningless in the end. Atheistic existentialism says, well, we try to create meaning, but it's based on who we are and what we do. True meaning, though, under biblical Christianity, is created by God. And then can we solve the problem of meaning? Nihilism, no. Atheistic existentialism, yes, by creating your own meaning. Now, I put the column in there, atheistic existentialism, because there is a cross with this new movement, with the atheistic existentialism. Because as far as Kevin and I have realized in our reading, all the founders, and he's going to show this very clearly next week, all the founders of this new movement are atheists. It's only until we get into this hybrid form that he's going to explain that we find some Christians imbibing this philosophy and trying to make it fit with Christianity. And we'll see the results of that. And then subjective or objective view. Look at this. Nihilism, atheistic existentialism, theistic existentialism, all are subjective. It's what you believe, what you make up. Only biblical Christianity is objective. And that is very, very important. So what are we facing now? Well, here are the foundations, breaking the foundations, because this is what's happening. CRT and similar ideologies seek to destroy the foundations of Western civilization, focus on eliminating systemic racism by deconstructing all sources of disparity. BLM, Black Lives Movement, mission statement included, I think they took this down now. Yeah, included originally the desire to dismantle cisgender privilege and disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. Get rid of the parents and the children. Children belong to the government now. And as a patriarchal, exclusionary Western white form of religion, Christianity must also be decolonized. In other words, deconstructed. In other words, destroyed in order for this to come about. So we're the target. Christianity is the target. Now, here is a good comparison. We have equality of opportunity. That's what we have in what you see at the top that I will be demonstrating is what we promote in our Christian culture, equality of opportunity. That has been turned on its head, equality of outcome, which we call equity. And there's no equality. It's about to boast inequality, an unequal system that we could have. Color blindness is what we promote, but they promote race-based partiality to the max. Everything is race. We promote the nuclear family. They say government should raise the children. We promote meritocracy, working hard to earn what you earn. They promote hiring and promotion based on race, not on what you can do, but the color of your skin. We promote law and order. They promote partial enforcement of law. In other words, those that are disenfranchised should not be punished. Only the ones that have been privileged should be punished. They deserve it. We promote individual freedom. They promote group accountability. That's why they say that all white people are oppressors, categorically, not looking at any individuals. We say respect for authority. And they say there is a rejection of authority, unless it's their own authority. And they make it their own authority. So that's how it's turned around. And so I see the ultimate goal to be this. Now, this is my personal belief. I believe that the ultimate goal of our present day atheistic Marxist movement in America is to destroy Christianity and create a society based on socialism and communism. And therefore, they want to deny that Jesus is God and that his death on the cross can bring us salvation. Remember what I had up there for the French Revolution? I have it here. It's a program of de-Christianization, as I see it. So we'll go through that this semester and let you decide. We'll show both sides. We want you to understand both sides. How does CRT answer Sire's 7 worldview questions? I'll be finishing up with this. First one, as I said, what is prime reality, the really real? Well, CRT is a secular, atheistic ideology that has no need for God. We need to realize that. Marx even said, quote, religion is the opium of the people. Christianity needs to be eradicated, they say. What is the nature of external reality? Reality is determined by the oppressor group, the hegemonic system, hegemony, power, control. The oppressed have their own version of reality. Reality is therefore relative, but the oppressed believe their reality is superior because it is an experienced or lived reality. We'll talk much more of that in the next few weeks. The oppressor group, who are they? Reality is based, or what do they believe? Reality is based on fact, logic, and reason. Subjective. Remember, Christianity was the objective religion. Oppressed group, reality is based on lived experience and individual narrative. The pre-modern age telling type of stories. It's subjective. It's what I believe because that's what I've lived. Whether it fits with reality or not, it doesn't matter. It's what you perceive. It's your subjective view. Number 3, what is a human being? Well, they would believe that it's the result of evolution. And this is where Darwin comes in again in an interesting way. Because in his book, Origin of Species, it had a longer subtitle, and in that subtitle was the phrase, preservation of favored races. What was his bottom line? The great white race was the privileged. I mean, he was saying this. So where did the other races belong? They were part of the evolutionary ascendancy. They were behind. So who brought this in? A Christian belief system brought this whole thing in at the beginning. Christians have always believed we're all the same. One race, one people, no difference. We're all made in the image of God, and we need to remember that. What happens to a person at death? No concept of eternity for those in CRT. Death is the end. They are atheists. They do not believe in God. Therefore, it is of extreme importance to make this world your own kingdom. So they want to grab for all the gusto they can. This is the only world they have. There is no hope for the future. It's nihilistic, but they keep on trying to push the nihilism away as long as they can. And if they can get enough things, enough toys to satisfy them, then they can be happy, they think. But it doesn't bring any happiness. It doesn't bring any joy. Why is it possible to know anything at all? What do they say? Standpoint epistemology is the core. What does that mean? You cannot know real truth unless you are part of that ethnicity. So I can't understand another ethnic group because I'm not of that ethnic group, according to them. How do we know what is right and wrong? Well, they pull in critical legal theory, which Kevin is going to explain in detail next time. Western concepts of right and wrong are jettisoned. Relative to good and evil, they say evil is anything that harms the oppressed or helps the oppressor. That's evil. And therefore, original sin is being in the oppressor class. And there's no redemption. There's no salvation. There's no forgiveness. It's a never ending. What is the mean if you are in the oppressor class? What is the meaning of history then? They use historical events and legal decisions to promote their ideology. And this you have to be careful of. You read in the 1619 Project very clearly. They speak about real historical events that are not widely known or understood and make generalized and inaccurate assumptions about the motivations. And you have to be careful. You have to read carefully. They highlight historical racism and real oppression, but identify every disparity in society as racism and every white person as a racist. This distorts the meaning of justice and oppression. So where do we go from here? Well, like apologetics, there are three things that I always bring up. We have to understand. We need to understand what this movement is saying. We need, and again, there are some legitimate things that they are saying that we need to take note of. We really do. We need to be generous in that way and listen. And that's what we've been doing. We've been listening, we've been reading, we've been trying to understand their side, and we want you to understand their side so that we can be civil in our conversation. Because some of you may disagree with what we say, and that's fine. But stay with us through this course and let's talk it through, converse, and keep open channels. But we also need to understand what Christianity says. And does it fit? Does this movement fit with Christianity? And if not, we need to defend what we believe. We need to be able to do that. What are the arguments? What do we say? How do we refute error? And we believe that there's a lot of error, and we need to be able to refute it with love and with truth. Those two key things are very, very important. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have, but with gentleness and humility. So next week, Kevin is going to lead off and deal with these things: critical race theory, intersectionality, and social justice, social gospel. So we're looking forward to that. I want to leave you with this verse, Colossians 1:28-29. Him we proclaim, warning everyone and teaching everyone, the understanding, with all wisdom, that we may present everyone mature in Christ. For this I toil, for this we toil, struggling with all his energy that he powerfully works within me. We all should be following this. We want to know the truth. We want to know what God has to say about this. That's our motive. That's what the class is about. And I hope that you continue to find this valuable. I thank you so much for being here this morning.